Welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I am Sherry Lip, Marketing Manager at Stimulus Technologies, and I'm here as usual today with Nathan Whittacre, CEO of Stimulus Technologies, and we are going to be talking about how and when a business should report a cybersecurity breach. So we've talked a lot about preventing breaches and some steps to take and planning, but now we're going to get into some specifics about what to do when it happens. So there's kind of a lot of different places I think we could start, but we can kind of get started with who should. Oh, and welcome Nathan. I forgot to say that. and so to get started, who should cybersecurity breaches be reported to?
Well, I think most companies will not want to report anything. That's the initial feeling. It's like, oh my gosh, this happened to me. I don't want to tell anybody because it can be embarrassing. I in one of my presentations, I talked one time about the fact that when you have a car accident or a break-in at your office, there's no embarrassment of reporting a theft. Um, but certainly with cyber, there's a stigma that you did something wrong, and companies don't want to report. But there are a lot of legal regulations that require you to report. So first off, you got to know what governing body you're regulated by. So if you have a breach and you have some type of compliance obligation, to HIPAA or CMMC or FTC or these different government organizations, they have requirements of reporting built into those regulations. So before you have a breach, you need to make sure that you have a plan of who you need to report to from a regulatory standpoint. But I can tell you that most states now have some type of regulation that require you to report data theft to your customers if their information is breached. So you kind of have to divide this up, because if you have just internal information that's breached without any client or confidential data, you don't necessarily need to report that to your customers or report that to government agencies. But if you have personal identifiable information, whether it's employee records, client records, anything that could be associated with PII or personal identifiable information or healthcare PII, those have to be reported per state law to those consumers or individuals. And so it is a complex landscape because there's a lot of different regulations. So I would say the first thing you'd want to do is discuss it with your insurance company. They're a good place to start because they're going to know a little bit more about the regulations and who you should report to. Also, if you have a data breach, you can communicate with your local FBI office. They generally have a team that's assigned for cyber attacks, and they want to track these things down. And also maybe your local police is a good start too, and they can guide you. So before you have to communicate with like all your customers, talk to the authorities first, and they can guide you through the process. So don't be embarrassed. It's like getting in a car accident or getting your office broken into. Start with the authorities, and then, same thing, contact your insurance company and they'll guide you through the process. But there's probably a lot of reporting that you have to do beyond that, which can be embarrassing. So.
If you do have a breach, like you're saying, if it only affects your business, it's not a customer impact, should you report it even if it's not a legal requirement, just because it is a criminal activity and it could be somebody they're tracking?
Well, I would certainly report it to the government agencies. I was just dealing with a prospect this week, and we were discussing their process that they've done, and they did contact the local FBI office, and they directed them to Homeland Security's CISA, which is a cyber attack group that's been developed under the Homeland Security, and they're actively tracking these groups and trying to find them. And so, working with these government agencies, you could potentially help bring down these groups. And so, a lot of times, the hacking and the cyber attacks are not just individuals that are attacking and taking down businesses. They're groups of people, whether it's a state sponsored cyber attacks or just a small group of individuals. They want to take these rings down, and they've done a good job of tracking these things down. And so you know they want to be informed so that they can do this. So don't be embarrassed. That again, you can search on the web, your local FBI office, and I would say if there's any type of breach that you have, get them involved, just like you would, if you had a break-in in your office. You want to report it to the right authorities so that they can find those individuals, hopefully.
Are there companies who maybe don't report breaches because they are worried that they're going to be blamed for it?
Yeah, that is the common issue why companies don't want to report, because not like breaking into an office. It's a perception that it's not your fault. You've locked the door, you have maybe a security system in place. You've done some things to protect your physical location, but there's this embarrassment of, okay, I was breached. Maybe I did something wrong to invite that breach in. And you might have. I mean, an employee might have done something wrong, or somebody clicked on something. But in the end, you need some experts to walk you through the process, and that's not just your IT and security professionals. It's also some government authorities that are here to assist you through the process. And I would suggest getting your insurance company involved too, because they can help you find some vendors that can do some forensics on your network. And if you have cyber liability insurance, they'll pay for that up to a certain amount to figure out how the systems were breached and prevented in the future.
I'm assuming, like with any crime, it's best to report it as soon as possible. But legally, how long is there any legal requirement for how long somebody has to report it?
It is state by state, and I would recommend talking to an attorney or somebody about those. And it also depends on what type of information was potentially stolen or encrypted. There's a big if there, and so having again, talking to the experts, whether it's an attorney or your insurance company, they'll help you through that process, because it really depends on what information was breached, whether it was payment card information, healthcare records, maybe PII on your employees or your customers. There are different regulations, but on those things, some of them you have to not just report it, but help your customers potentially sign up for credit reporting services and pay for that. So there may be some things that you have to do, and you have to do it relatively quickly. It can't be something that you do years in the future. So again, it depends on every state. This is often regulated by the state, and every state has different reporting methods and who needs to report. And then again, if you have protected information, it depends on the information that got out.
And what information is a business going to report when they make the report? Or are they going to give?
Yeah, so they're going to generally give the type of attack that happened, their information that may have been released. We probably all gotten this letter as a consumer in the mail at one point that, the store that you regularly go to, or maybe a vendor that you use, was breached. They say estimated what happened when information got out, and then what they've done about it. So there's, we've seen these letters before, probably just threw them in the trash. But a lot of times, especially if you're dealing with credit information, whether it's credit cards or social security numbers, date of birth, things like that for consumers, there's maybe some legal requirements to pay for credit monitoring services as part of that. And again, if you have cyber liability insurance, it might cover some of that. So That's why one of your first phone calls should be to your insurance company.
Yeah. What requirements does a business have for reporting to their customers?
Again, it really depends on the type of information that got out. So, if you're a business to business company and you don't have any personal information, so if you just have information on your vendors or your customers, business name and mailing address, things like that, and you don't have credit card numbers stored and none of that was breached, then there's probably little that you have to report. But even if you're business to business and collecting like bank account, ACH records, or tax IDs, things like that, then you would have to notify them of that information. So it really depends on the type of information you have and if it's classified, under a regulation of having to be reported.
So, how does a company, kind of going back to like this has just happened, how do they assess the exact impact of the breach on their company and on their data?
A lot of times, you'll bring in a forensic expert that will go back and do the research on what information was impacted, how it was impacted, and there's specialized companies that come in and do these forensic investigations. Um, if you have proper insurance in place, a lot of times the insurance company will pay for that and require it as part of it. So they'll have a set of firms that they use in the different areas, and they'll come in and pull all the data on the networking information and do an analysis on it. So there's very specialized firms. These are forensic computer companies that will do that research. And the great thing about that too is that will also hopefully let you know what you can do better on your network to be able to patch it so that it doesn't happen in the future. So we've seen, again, as we've worked with prospects that come to us after a breach, we often work with this forensic company to implement new technologies inside their business to prevent future attacks. And sometimes companies have done everything that they can possible, and they're just sometimes you can't be 100% accurate. So there may be little that you have to change, but those forensics companies can often identify where the breach happened and then all the information that was part of that data breach.
So, if this happens to a company and they've put out their notifications, done all the reporting, how do you have advice for how they can, do their notification to customers and can go forward and keep that trust or build that trust back?
That's probably the hardest part of it. Sometimes when these things happen, it creates this sense of lack of trust. Unlike, I go back to the example of your office being broken into, there's often very little blame that happens when your building's broken into. But when your networks are broken into, the tendency that we have today is to blame the company. I think if you over communicate, if you are actively communicating on what's happening, what you've done to prevent it, I think it builds that trust back. Hiding the information or not communicating is builds that lack of trust. So I recommend make sure that you have some written letters out to the customers, communicate other ways via email, social media, whatever it may be. I was really one of our peers that I know. They're not a customer, but they had a breach, and I was very impressed by their amount of communication that they had. They owned up to the breach very quickly. They let their customers know that they were going to be down for a certain amount of time as they resolved the breach. Throughout that process, they continued to communicate with their customers. They put some information out in the local media too to notify what had happened, and they continued to have that strong communication strategy of what they did, what they're doing, and how they're getting back up and running. And I think it built a lot of confidence back up that they were willing to resolve that problem. So I think the more communication you have, the better. If this comes out in a local news report or social media or whatever without you saying it, if you don't control the story and the narrative, then that's what builds that distrust for your organization. But if you control the narrative, you're communicating, you're getting that information out there, you can build that trust back up very quickly.
Yeah, I think transparency in today's digital age, because we have such an easy ability to be transparent, it's very important to people, that we be the ones that communicate. It puts us closer to the customer, although on both sides, both good, and you get the instant feedback as well.
Absolutely. And again, with as being the CEO, the buck stops with you. Don't blame other people. Don't blame your IT department or your vendors or whatever it may be. Own up to it and just you know notify everybody what you're doing. And I think the other thing that we need to be careful of is communicate with your employees too what's going on, because they might not be your customers, but they're your most important asset in your business. So communicate with your employees, let them know what's going on. Oftentimes their work is going to be dramatically disrupted, and show some confidence that they're going to have a job the next day too. There's always that worry that if this data breach happens, we can't work today, we're going to lose customers. Exude the confidence that you're going to get past it, and the employees will step up and help you through it too. Don't blame them, obviously, for what happened. And as a CEO, take charge and make sure that you get through that.
And do you think it's important for a business to have a plan for employees, if they get asked about this, what their response should be or who they should direct people to is probably important.
Yeah, certainly. I think having a clear communication strategy beforehand is really important. Um, and make sure that communication, no matter who you talk to inside the organization, is the same. So the distrust is seeded by misinformation or different information coming out from the organization. So there should be a central line of communication that's out to customers or to the media or whatever it may be, and it should be unified. What that communication is.
And, I think this is important information for businesses. Like you said, they can be embarrassed to report it. Do you have any final thoughts on this, on how business owners, and CEOs can get over that fear of reporting this type of crime?
I think having a strategy before it happens is the most important thing. You know, it, it's probably for most businesses, it's not if, but when you'll have some type of breach that you'll have to deal with. And so every business should plan for this so that they're prepared and can move forward through an existing plan rather than having to come up with it, on the fly. So the better you plan, the better you're prepared, the easier the process will be going forward. That's probably my biggest advice is just spend a little bit of time on putting a plan together. Um, there's plenty of companies that can help you with that. Stimulus Technologies does it as part of our security packages. If you're not one of our customers, maybe talk to your insurance company to get some recommendations. And there's plenty of templates online to build this, but a good communication strategy and a disaster response plan is worth its weight in gold when it happens.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Nathan. Great information as always.
Well, thanks, Sherry. It's always great to do this.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.